The screen is pitch black. Then it arrives, not gently, not gradually. The rhythmic, deafening thud of a heavy bass line from a West Philly block party slams into the darkness like a fist through a wall. Horns, laughter, the smell of charcoal, and seasoning you can almost taste through the noise. And then, before a single image has had the chance to settle, a window shatters. A heavy ceramic moon jar, a priceless white porcelain relic from the Joseon dynasty, the kind kept behind glass in museums with humidity controls and armed guards, tumbles through the broken frame and smashes against the wet pavement of South Philadelphia alleyway. The porcelain doesn't just break. It explodes into 100 white shards that scatter across the black asphalt like the bones of something holy. You think this clay defines us? Naomi screamed. She was standing in the rain with her braids soaked flat against her neck, her right hand gripping a kitchen cleaver, the blade catching the weak orange light from the alley's single overhead lamp. She was pointing it at Tae-Min with the calm precision of someone who had grown up knowing the difference between a threat and a promise. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She was furious in the way that only people who have been lied to by the people they loved most know how to be furious. Quietly, completely, all the way down to the marrow. Tae-Min wasn't flinching. He stood in the same rain, his expensive dark suit soaked through, holding a charred leather-bound ledger to his chest the way a child holds something irreplaceable. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on her. He wasn't afraid of the cleaver. He wasn't afraid of the rain. He appeared to be afraid of something else entirely, something the alley couldn't contain. Behind them, the screech of tires cut through the sound of the rain. A black SUV with tinted windows swerved hard into the mouth of the alley, its headlights flooding the space between them in white light. "Naomi, get down." Tae-Min moved before the words were fully out of his mouth. He tackled her sideways into a pile of industrial trash liners stacked against the alley wall, just as a shot pinged off the brick exactly where her head had been a second before. The porcelain shards of the moon jar scattered further under their weight. The rain kept falling. The bass from the block party still thumped, indifferent, 3 streets away. 24 hours earlier, the world was quiet. Naomi Washington had been standing in the back kitchen of Big Mike's Soul Pit on the corner of Baltimore Avenue and 52nd Street, stirring a pot of brown gravy that had been simmering on that same industrial burner for 40 consecutive years. She stirred the way her father had taught her, slow, clockwise, with a flat wooden spoon he'd carved himself in a piece of black walnut he swore came from his grandmother's yard in Gadsden, Alabama. The kitchen smelled of rendered pork fat and scorched onion, and something deeper, older, the smell Naomi had never been able to make. Home was the closest word, but home felt complicated now. Big Mike Washington had passed 3 days ago. Cardiac arrest, the doctor said. Sudden, the neighbors said. 42 years in this kitchen, and then gone between a Wednesday lunch service and dinner prep, sitting in his office chair with a cup of sweet tea, still warm on the desk beside him. He'd left Naomi the restaurant, its debts, a rusted iron key on a red cord, and a note in his handwriting that said only, open the bottom drawer. The private one. She had waited 3 days to open it. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she knew, the way you sometimes know before you look, that what was inside the drawer was going to change the shape of everything she thought she understood about her life. The bottom drawer held a single item, a VHS tape in a cracked plastic case, labeled in black marker in handwriting that wasn't her father's. The label said, 1992, the Pact. Naomi carried it to the back office and pushed it into the dusty VCR her father had kept on the shelf above his desk for 20 years, plugged in and ready, as if he'd always known this moment was coming. The tracking lines cleared slowly. The image that resolved on the small television screen stopped her breath cold. A younger Big Mike stood in front of a burning grocery store. The sky behind him was orange and black with smoke. There were people running in the background and the sound of sirens, and somewhere off-screen someone was crying. Naomi recognized the footage immediately. Los Angeles, April 1992. The riots that followed the acquittal of the officers who beat Rodney King. 4 days of fire that consumed 53 lives and $1 billion of property, and the last remaining myth that justice in America was colorblind. But Big Mike wasn't running. He was standing still, his wide shoulders squared, and beside him stood a Korean woman in a silk hanbok the color of pale celadon. She was holding a shotgun at her hip with the practiced comfort of someone who had carried one before. They weren't fighting each other. They were standing back to back, facing outward in opposite directions, guarding the steel door of a shared vault set into the side of the burning building. "If we don't make it out," Big Mike's voice crackled through the television speaker, rough with smoke and emotion, "the inheritance goes to the child of the bridge." He paused. His eyes found the camera. "She doesn't know yet, but she will. When the time comes, she will know everything." Naomi's hand went still on the wooden spoon. The gravy continued to move in slow circles without her. She wasn't his biological daughter. The bell above the restaurant's front door rang before the thought had fully formed. The man who walked in looked like he had stepped directly off a Seoul Fashion Week runway and then been rerouted to a Seoul food restaurant in West Philadelphia without anyone bothering to explain the error. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with sharp cheekbones and the kind of cold, considered stillness that only comes from a lifetime of training yourself not to react. His suit was charcoal and fitted and unmistakably expensive. His watch caught the kitchen light. His eyes, dark and unhurried, moved once around the restaurant and then landed on Naomi and stayed there. He didn't greet her. He didn't introduce himself. He walked to the counter, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and laid a key on the worn Formica surface. It was iron. It was rusted. It hung on a red cord, and it was identical, in every measurable way, to the one her father had left in the bottom drawer. "My grandmother died last night," he said. His voice was a low baritone, careful and precise. Her last words were to find the girl with the silver ladle. His eyes moved to the spoon in Naomi's hand. "We have approximately 10 minutes before my cousins arrive to burn this building to the ground, looking for what's underneath the floorboards." Naomi opened her mouth. A brick came through the front window. The glass hadn't finished falling before 3 men in tactical gear came through the kitchen entrance. They moved in the coordinated economy of motion way of people who did this professionally. The first one had his eyes on the ledger still open on the counter. The second was already reaching for Naomi's arm. The third was covering the back exit. Naomi didn't scream. She grabbed the handle of the pot of boiling pasta water that had been sitting on the back burner since the aborted lunch service, and she swung it in a wide, sweeping arc. The steam that erupted from the impact created a white cloud that filled the rear half of the kitchen in seconds. A man swore in pain. The visibility dropped to nothing. Tae-Min used the cover. He moved through the steam with a precise, brutal efficiency. 2 rapid leg sweeps that took down the second and third men before they had recalibrated their vision. He didn't waste a single movement. Naomi grabbed her father's secret spice tin from the shelf above the stove, and Tae-Min snatched the ledger from the counter. Together they ran. They scrambled through the grease-slicked back corridor and out the rear door into the alley behind the restaurant, just as the Soul Pit's kitchen ignited in a full backdraft explosion that blew the back windows out and sent a wall of orange heat rolling across the alley behind them. Naomi didn't look back. Tae-Min's silver coupe was idling at the alley entrance, driver's door already open. "Who are you?" Naomi demanded as the car hit 80 miles per hour on the I-95 ramp. Tae-Min was bleeding from a graze on his left temple. He didn't touch it. "My name is Tae-Min Han. My grandmother was Park Soon-hee. She stood next to your father in 1992 with a shotgun." He kept his eyes on the road. "For 20 years, I have worked as a translator for my grandfather's business operations. I am what my family calls the silent translator, the one who hears everything and is trusted to say nothing. 3 months ago, I heard my grandfather give the order to have your father killed. I intervened. It cost me the time I needed to find you first." Another pause. I was 96 hours too late. The silence in the car had weight to it. Naomi sat with her father's spice tin in her lap and looked at this stranger's profile in the dark car. His jaw was tight with something she couldn't name yet. Grief, maybe, or the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a secret so large it has rearranged the architecture of their life around it. The ledger, she said finally. What's in it? Tae-Min reached across and opened it on her lap without taking his eyes off the highway. The pages were dense with handwriting in two scripts, English and Korean, alternating, the way two people who share a language between them write when they don't need translation. Your father called it the recipe for a revolution. It is not a recipe in any conventional sense. It is a chemical formula. In the late 1980s, Big Mike Washington and Park Soon-Hee jointly developed a synthetic textile dye process that was non-toxic, scalable, and color-fast in ways that existing industrial dyes were not. It was botanical in origin. Your father provided the foundational compound knowledge, plant-based chemistry he had learned from his grandmother, rooted in traditions that West African and Southern American agricultural communities had refined across generations. My grandmother provided the laboratory infrastructure in Seoul and the biochemical refinement process. He paused. Together, they created something that became the backbone of an entire sector of the 1990s tech manufacturing boom. Billions of dollars. And, Naomi said, my grandfather filed the patent under his company's name alone. He cut your father out entirely. He paid men to discredit your father, to bury the collaborative evidence, and to ensure Park Soon-Hee never spoke about her contribution publicly. His voice was steady, but something in his grip on the wheel had tightened. My grandmother spent the last 30 years watching the wealth that should have belonged to two families compound in one man's hands. She spent those same 30 years building a case. The ledger is that case. It contains the original formula, the development timeline, co-authored lab notes, and a notarized record of your father's contribution that predates my grandfather's patent filing by 14 months. Naomi looked out the window at the dark highway. The rain was heavier now. The inheritance, she said quietly. It was never money. No, Tae-Min said. It was never money. He pulled off the highway at an unmarked exit and drove 4 blocks east into North Philadelphia, pulling into an underground parking garage below what appeared from the outside to be a laundromat. He led her through a steel door in the garage wall and down a corridor that smelled of eucalyptus and cedar-scented steam, and then they were inside. The Jjimjilbang was a world that shouldn't have existed in a North Philadelphia basement, and yet here it was complete and immaculate. A maze of heated clay rooms and wooden rest areas and the deep, enveloping warmth of a baked-earth salt room, where the air itself felt thick and mineral and ancient. Tae-Min explained in a low voice that it had been built by his grandmother's closest friend, a woman named Mrs. O, 40 years ago, for the Korean community that had settled in this part of the city and needed a place that was theirs. It had survived because Mrs. O had never advertised it, and because the neighborhood had protected it in the same instinctive way communities protect things they recognize as sacred. It was the perfect place to disappear. They sat in the salt room and spread the ledger open between them, working through the coded notations with the careful, concentrated silence of two people who have recognized in each other a shared frequency, a way of processing the world through pattern and detail that neither of them had ever been able to explain to anyone else. The salt air pressed around them. The heat was heavy and clean. For a brief, strange hour, the world outside the thick clay walls ceased to exist. Then Naomi's phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime request from her brother Malik. She accepted it, and the screen filled with his face, bruised above the left cheekbone, his eyes doing the thing they had always done when he was scared and trying not to show it, a childhood tell she had never told him she'd learned to read. He was sitting in a high-rise office. The skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him was not Philadelphia. And he was not alone. Seated beside him at a long glass table was a man Naomi had never seen before, but whose sharp cheekbones and cold posture she recognized immediately as a variation of the man sitting next to her in the salt room. Tae-Min's jaw went hard. "Sis," Malik said, his voice carrying the specific flatness of someone reading from a script they've been told not to deviate from. "Just give them the book. They're offering $5 million. We can save the neighborhood. We can save the restaurant block. We can do something real. Naomi, just give them the book, and this ends tonight." Naomi looked at the screen. She looked at Tae-Min. She looked back at her brother's bruised face and the stranger sitting calmly beside him, and she felt the specific, physical sensation of betrayal. Not the hot shock of it, but the cold, settling weight of it, the way it rearranges the internal furniture of everything you thought you could rely on. Tae-Min took the phone from her hand gently, but without hesitation. "Junho," he said. His Korean was flat and precise and cold as a scalpel. He didn't raise his voice. "I know where you are. I know what you need. And I want you to understand something clearly." He paused. "If you touch the girl's brother again, I burn the ledger. And you know I have the matches. You know I have always had the matches." He held the phone steady for 3 more seconds, letting the silence do what his words had started. Then he placed it face down on the floor and stepped on it once, cleanly, until the screen went dark. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the salt room silence from before. It had edges to it. Naomi was shaking. She didn't realize it until Tae-Min turned to look at her, and his expression changed. Not dramatically, not with the performance of emotion, but in the small, involuntary way a face changes when it stops managing itself and just responds. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers without quite landing, respecting a boundary he hadn't been given explicit permission to cross. "I thought I knew my life," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I thought I knew exactly what I was, what I came from, what I was building toward. I had the restaurant and the neighborhood and my father's gravy recipe, and I thought that was a whole life. I thought that was enough to be." "You are the child of the bridge," Tae-Min said. "That is not a lesser thing than what you thought you were. It is a larger thing." He paused. His hand finally settled over hers, warm against the mineral cool of the salt room. "We are the half-life of something they try to bury. Your father's knowledge, my grandmother's science. The parts of both our histories that someone decided were inconvenient and expendable. But what they buried is still radiating. It never stopped." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. The heat of the room pressed around them like a hell breath. The chemistry between them was not the easy, manufactured warmth of a meet-cute. It was stranger and more specific than that. The recognition of two people who have been shaped by similar forces of silence and inheritance and expectation, meeting each other across the distance of two completely different worlds. She leaned toward him. He leaned toward her. Every fire alarm in the building went off simultaneously. Junho hadn't waited. He had sent a team to men recognized immediately. His grandfather's former associates. Men who had been present at enough of those translated meetings to know exactly how Tae-Min operated and exactly what his weaknesses were. They came through the steam corridors from 3 directions at once, using the heat and reduced visibility to their advantage. But they had made the elementary mistake of assuming that a South Philadelphia chef had no combat language. Naomi Washington had grown up on streets where knowing how to use what was in your hands was not a skill, but a survival requirement. She pulled a heavy wet towel from the rack on the salt room wall, snapped it taut between her fists, and used it as a whip with a technique she had developed at 16 years old during a summer when the block had been particularly hostile. The reach and the sting of it in the steam-thick corridor was formidable. She took the first man across the throat before he had registered she was a physical threat. Tae-Min moved through the reduced visibility the way water moves through a narrow space, completely, without friction, finding every gap. 3 attackers. 12 seconds. Precise pressure point strikes delivered with the calm efficiency of a man who had spent years living in rooms where violence was always a possibility and had prepared accordingly. They burst through the bathhouse's back emergency exit into the Philadelphia rain, soaked and breathless and alive, and ran. Which brought them to the alley. Which brought them to the moon jar and the cleaver and the charred ledger and the shot that had taken a chip of brick from the wall where Naomi's head had been. Now Tae-Min pulled her up from the pile of trash liners, and they pressed their backs against the alley wall as the black SUV's door opened. Junho climbed onto the fire escape above them from the building's second-floor window, flanked by 2 men, his expensive shoes making a precise sound on the metal grating as he positioned himself above them and looked down with the expression of a man who has always had the high ground and has never once considered that this might change. "Last chance, cousin," Junho called down over the sound of the rain. "Hand over the recipe for the revolution, or Philadelphia becomes your graveyard tonight." Naomi looked at the shards of the white moon jar scattered across the black asphalt between her feet. Ancient porcelain mixed into the wet gravel of a South Philadelphia alley. She thought about what it meant that something that old and that beautiful could be destroyed this carelessly, and whether the destruction of it changed what it had been or only changed what it was now. The inheritance, she said quietly. It's not the money, and it's not the formula either, is it? The ledger contains more than the formula, Tae-Min said. It contains the coordinates to the original laboratory, the place where our parents first built this together before my grandfather moved the work to Seoul. He paused. The lab is not in Seoul. It is under the DMZ, in the strip of land between North and South Korea that belongs to neither country and therefore, in a specific technical and legal sense, belongs to anyone who can reach it. I don't have a passport, Naomi said. Something wild and almost laughing was rising in her chest. Tae-Min reached into his jacket, soaked through, the lining probably ruined, and produced a blue folder. He held it out to her in the rain. My grandmother had this prepared for you 3 years ago. She told me to keep it ready. He met her eyes. She always knew this day would come. She was simply waiting to find out which of us would survive long enough to use it. Above them on the fire escape, Junho's patience had run out. He nodded to the men beside him. Naomi looked at Tae-Min. He looked at her. No words passed between them, and none were needed. The translation between them had become fluent somewhere between the Jjimjilbang and the alley, faster than either of them had language for. She reached into her father's spice tin, the one thing she had saved from the burning kitchen, the one item among everything she had grabbed by pure instinct. It was not salt. It was not any ordinary spice. Big Mike Washington had been a man of considerable practical wisdom, and among the items of that wisdom was a mixture he had developed over decades from dried habanero husks and magnesium flakes, prepared and sealed in clay and kept on that specific shelf for what he had always called, with characteristic understatement, emergencies. He had shown Naomi what it did once, in the parking lot of the restaurant, when she was 14 years old, and she had never forgotten the white-orange light of it. She threw the pouch into the wide puddle at the base of the fire escape. Tae-Min raised the flare gun he had taken from the bathhouse emergency cabinet and fired. The alley erupted. The white and orange flash was not an explosion in the conventional sense. It was a light event, total and blinding, the kind of sudden photonic overload that renders the human visual system completely non-functional for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. In the chaos of shouting and the clatter of dropped weapons and the sound of men stumbling on wet metal grating, Naomi and Tae-Min found a sewer grate at the base of the alley wall and dropped through it. The screen went black. The sound of rushing water and distant shouting faded into silence. And then, in the absolute dark of the sewer passage beneath South Philadelphia, a light appeared ahead of them. Not a flashlight, not a phone screen. A warm, yellow, deliberate light. A lantern, old-fashioned and unmistakably intentional, held by a hand reaching out from a narrow passage in the sewer wall that was not on any city map Naomi had ever seen. The hand was a woman's hand. The sleeve above it was the olive green of a military field jacket, worn and carefully mended in several places. The lantern swung gently as the woman stepped into the passage. She was perhaps 30 years old. Her face was Naomi's face in certain architectural ways. The set of the jaw, the proportion of the forehead, the specific alertness of the eyes, and it was Tae-Min's face in others, the cheekbones, the disciplined stillness of expression. She was neither of the worlds they had come from, and she was unmistakably made of both of them. In her other hand, she held an iron key on a red cord. Tae-Min made a sound Naomi had not heard from him before. Something between recognition and the kind of grief that comes when something you believed was permanently lost reveals itself to have been merely hidden. "You died," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the spoken form of something he had been carrying for a long time. The crossing in 1993. The border incident. My grandfather's documents said. Your grandfather's documents said what your grandfather needed them to say, the woman replied. Her English was precise and accented and carried inside it the trace structures of at least 3 other languages. She looked at Naomi with an expression of recognition so direct and unguarded it was almost difficult to witness. My name is Cho Yeon. My mother was a North Korean defector named Cho Hannah. My father," she paused, and the pause held an entire life in it, "was a man named Michael Washington, who people called Big Mike, who came to the border crossing point in the spring of 1993 as part of a covert arrangement, who stayed longer than he was supposed to, and who left something behind that he spent the next 30 years trying to find his way back to." The lantern light moved across all three of their faces. "I have been living in the laboratory," Cho Yeon said simply, "under the DMZ, for 7 years. I have been waiting for someone to come with the other 2 keys." She looked at the ledger under Tae-Min's arm. "And I have been protecting something that my mother left for the day you arrived. Something that completes the formula. Something that explains why your grandfather, Tae-Min, has been sending people into that strip of land for 15 years and never finding what he is looking for." She stepped back into the passage and raised the lantern higher, illuminating the narrow corridor beyond her. It extended further than the lantern's light could reach, heading north and down, deeper and further than a Philadelphia sewer had any right to go. The bridge wasn't between 2 families, Cho Yeon said. It was between 3 worlds, and it was built to last. Naomi Washington stood in a sewer beneath the city where she had been born and raised and fed and shaped and loved and lied to, holding her dead father's spice tin and a passport prepared for her by a woman she had never met, standing next to a man she had known for less than 24 hours and already trusted more than she understood, looking at a sister she had not known existed until 60 seconds ago. She thought about the moon jar. She thought about how it had shattered, completely, irreversibly, all that careful Joseon dynasty craftsmanship in 100 pieces on wet asphalt, and how the shards had still caught the light. She thought about gravy that had been simmering for 40 years. She thought about what her father had said on the tape, his voice rough with smoke and the particular emotion of a man making a promise to people who were not yet born into the knowledge of what it meant. The inheritance goes to the child of the bridge. Not child. Children. "Let's go," Naomi said. Above them, through the sewer grate, the sound of Junho's men regrouping in the alley filtered down like distant weather. Below them, the corridor extended into the dark and the deep, toward a laboratory beneath the most heavily guarded strip of land on Earth, toward a formula that had been stolen and hidden and was now, finally, being reclaimed by the people it had always belonged to. The 3 of them walked forward into the lantern light. The bridge between Seoul and Philly, and the hidden country between them, was burning, and they were just getting started. Now, if you have made it this far, you already know what this story is. You know what Naomi is carrying. You know what Tae-Min gave up to be standing in that sewer. And you know that Cho Yeon did not spend 7 years alone in the dark beneath the DMZ, waiting for just anyone. She was waiting for exactly these 2 people. Which means part 2, the Seoul Extraction, is not just the next chapter. It is the moment the whole story shifts into a higher gear. So here's what you need to do right now, before you do anything else. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Because when part 2 drops, it is dropping without warning, and the people who are not subscribed are going to find out about it 3 days late in someone else's comment section. And speaking of comment sections, scroll down right now and tell me one thing. Do you think Malik genuinely betrayed his sister for $5 million? Or is he running a play that none of us have figured out yet? Because that bruise on his face is doing a lot of work, and I want to know if you caught it. Like this video if the moon jar scene hit you harder than you expected. Share it with one person who needs a story that doesn't look or sound like anything they have seen before. And if you're new here, welcome to Sarangi&Soul, where Seoul meets Philly, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the inheritance is never what anyone tells you it is. Part 2 is coming. The lab is under the DMZ. Cho Yeon has been waiting, and we're just getting started.